Hey guys, at the end of the last episode I had mentioned that what I felt was the next step with this Honda CB550 was pulling the engine to freshen up the top end. Now I made true on that claim by doing my first ever engine pull on, I literally built a K100, what am I talking about? The milestone here was that I actually did extensive engine disassembly, something I didn't really need to do on my K100. So what kind of work was I thinking about? Top end rebuild, cylinder honing, new pistons and rings, the stuff that an old dog of an engine might need after nearly 50 years. But in typical me fashion, I want to stall and talk about something else real quick before I jump into some anxiety-inducing new task. One thing that helps with anxiety is a clean place of work, and this ain't exactly that. There's a lot of parts here that could be sold, so I proceeded to take inventory of what was trash, something I would want to keep, and something I would want to sell. Took a lot of photos of the stuff and decided to post them on eBay. Here's some of those. Okay. Engine time? Well, hold on, guy, we'll get there. At this point, I had the front wheel bearings and the new non-warped rotors so I could get those installed. Now after all that, the front wheel rolled like complete butter. I had thrown the CBR controls on the bike, just to be able to walk it and mock it up, but in order to actually test ride the bike, I would have to create some kind of Frankenstein abomination of controls. So I went back to the 550 bars and started mixing and matching things. I would need the 550 throttle and starter switch for obvious reasons, and then on the other side I would need the clutch purge since the CBR 1000 had hydraulic setup. I ran into a problem though. The little threaded adjuster thing at the end of the lever. I didn't have one. I thought I had a few, but I couldn't find a single one in the basement. But fear not, I know exactly where to find one or two off-site. But then it wasn't even remotely the right size. And to make it worse, remember when I bought that second clutch perch like last year because the previous owner cut the clutch safety starter switch? Yeah, I remembered that afterwards, and it definitely had the adjuster on it. But out of pure spite, I tossed it away and embraced my inner hack by grinding the Yamaha one down and rigging it up with electrical tape. For no reason whatsoever. Like, I'm looking back at this in retrospect, I'm writing the script, and like the spite here is just impressive. I took the bike for a spin and the dead brake issue was fixed. The brakes work like normal. The wheel rolled like normal. But the overall alignment is ever so slightly off, which makes me think that maybe the stem is a little bit tweaked. Fix, and I was just happy to see that the bike was steerable and the dead brake / wobble issue was gone. Engine time? Calm down, I'll get to it. I just gotta procrastinate a little bit more. My backyard workbench, it's still a pig pen, so I did the same thing that I did with the little front area. Trash, keep, sell. All the CBR bench shit was trash. I don't even want to bother selling that stuff because I can't verify what's good and what isn't. There was some BMW stuff, like, the starter motor. It worked. It was looking kind of rough, so I opted to keep it instead of trying to sell it. This horn barely worked, so I tossed it. The steering damper worked, but I checked how much people sell them for on eBay. About $20, so not really worth the sweat. I had this anti-gravity aluminum battery box that I don't think is even sold anymore, so I held on to it. I mean, I'm not going to use it on this bike. I didn't use it on the K100, but maybe it'll come into use in the future. Not a draw. I straightened it out and I kept a few goodies in it. I found my step drill bit, which I thought I lost, 2 fuel pressure regulators, an old clutch that was trash, a throttle position sensor, and some hardware for the 550 front end, which I also got ready to sell. Engine, wait, hold on. I got this Amazon power adapter for my camera, so now I could just film infinitely instead of relying on my power drained battery that lasts about 20 minutes of runtime. Okay, now let's pull an engine. Now, I didn't bother filming removing the oil or the gas tank, the carburetors, and the seat and all that. I just followed the service manual, got cracking, and started filming at the engine bolts. This back upper bolt, I think I spent about 30 minutes on it, just oiling it, heating it, spinning it, knocking it out, driving it back in, because I swear it was seized in there harder than anything I'd probably ever seen in my life. It was all that steel on aluminum corrosion. And that wasn't really, a good source of, motivation when that happened. After all that, the engine was now floating in the frame, so I removed the oil filter and began to prepare for the hard part, getting the square peg out of the round hole. Oh, and the square peg happens to weigh just as much as a person. This wasn't easy, but it just took some finessing. I think the main culprit here is the header studs, but I made it happen anyway. Now, I said that was the hard part, but now for the harder part, actually getting this thing inside and down the flight of stairs. This engine is smaller and a little bit lighter than the K100, so with the help of my pops and a truck strap and a wood plank, we goofily managed it. Haven't done this before a few times, you know, with the K100.
Hold on, I got this. It's not going anywhere. Hit the dolly. I got this.
We got on the dolly, I wheeled it to the boiler room area, which would serve as my teardown zone. Indoors, away from elements, over a floor that oil spills wouldn't really matter on. Out of the way, mostly. Kinda tight, but it's what I got. So I called it a day because I didn't even really have everything I needed yet to start working on it. Pulling the engine was just an exercise in motivation. And things were certainly in motion now. Sometime later, maybe a week or so, I came back to the engine after collecting parts, tools, and knowledge. I mainly based my rebuild on a guide made by Matthew MC Repair, which I'll link below. It's a 2.5-hour guide, so you're pretty much covered. I don't have much space or good lighting in here, so I hope the camera work is at least satisfactory. First, I use an impact screwdriver on the top bolts to remove the rocker arm cover. But of course, there's always that one bolt that has to be stubborn, right? I ended up just drilling that shit out. After a while, I had the camshaft and the valves exposed. Time to remove the cam. It was tough because the tension bolt on the cam chain tensioner was actually broken, so it just spun in place. So I had to finagle really hard to get the cam out of there. And after that, I could get at the studs that was holding everything together. Standard crisscross pattern from the center outward. Oh, don't totally forget to pull the spark plugs like I did. When everything is broken loose, you just gotta fish out the hardware with a magnet. Now the pistons were caked with carbon and the cylinder walls were glazed over, pretty much as expected. Now it was time to remove the cylinders themselves. There are pry points at the side, and you can use a rubber mallet. Just don't get too goofy on it because you can break off the coolant fins. Like I did. Now, it wasn't a maintenance surface, so I very quickly got over it. The issue was that there was a lot of corrosion in these studs holding the cylinders in place, similar to the engine mount bolt outside, that situation I was in, where the corrosion between the two different materials is just like, I just had to keep at it while vacuuming the corrosion out. Eventually I got the cylinders off, but I ended up scratching up the pistons in the process, which I reckon, they should be replaced anyway, so I was fine with it. I covered the area around the pistons from any dust and stuff, and I diverted my attention to the cylinder head maybe another week later. The objective was to pull a valve train out of the head for the rebuild, and in order to do that, you need a valve stem puller tool. This is an eBay kit that I had since the K100, but never needed to use. So here's how it works. You install a tool like so, with the appropriately sized open compressor pushing against the spring retainer and the pin on the bottom pushing against the valve itself. You then tighten the tool to compress the spring, and this allows you to access the valve keepers with a magnet. Two small little half circle moon things. Once you get those out, literally everything else comes out like nothing. And that's it. You just gotta do it 8 times for 8 valves. After that, I gave the head a preliminary clean. I shot some oven cleaner at it to get some of that baked on carbon out of there. Certainly worked well enough to let me actually see what I was working on. I then began the gasket scraping process, which, funnily enough, was easily the most demoralizing part of this process, and I'm not the only one that feels this way. It's very, very, very tedious, and if you do it wrong, you end up with a surface that's impossible to seal because you'll have high and low spots. The surface has to be very much on point, or else you'll be in for a slew of problems, relating to head gasket sealing and, compression and stuff like that. I mainly used a razor and a carbide scraper, but that didn't work very well, and I was scratching the surface in a few places. So, that day I went out to try to find some gasket remover solvent, but I couldn't find any locally, so I ended up just ordering some. I put this on hold for a few days until the solvent was scheduled to arrive, and I went to my parents' house the day it was supposed to, but I got there before it actually came. By then I had discovered the technique that helps you even out the head surface when you use sandpaper and a piece of glass, granite, or ceramic, something perfectly level. So I gave it a shot. I was getting kind of antsy. It kind of worked, but the worst of the gasket material was simply not going anywhere. Like, it was starting to scratch metal as opposed to remove a gasket. By that point, I was just like, dude, screw this. I'm not gonna do this wrong and then have to take the whole thing apart again. Let's just do it right the first time and get the head decked at a machine shop. So I searched around on the internet and I found this shop in Brooklyn called Clayton Cylinder Heads. I called them up and they said that they could have me over like literally that instant. So I dropped the head and the cylinder off at the shop. My New York it's on Utica Avenue in Flatbush, Brooklyn, the Flatbush section of Brooklyn. So I dropped off the parts at 12:30 noon and I was called back to pick them up at 2 on the dot. So, same day. And I kept it simple too with the order. All I asked for was the head to be decked, but he also cleaned a fair amount of carbon from the exhaust ports. And I asked for the cylinders to be inspected for warpage, but he also removed some gasket material by hand on the head side of the cylinders. And that was for 180, but of course you got a tip, so I rounded up to 200. With all that done, I decided that I was done wrenching for the day, and I coated everything with WD-40 so the steel and iron parts don't start rusting on me. I have to scrape the gasket off of the block and the underside of the cylinders, but that isn't as critical, nor is it gonna be as baked on as the head gasket was. Plus, I'll have the solvent with me too. I think I'm gonna save the assembly and installation for next time since it's been a while since I updated this. The great thing is that I have pretty much everything I need for the reassembly, so I just gotta get on it. You can look forward to that next time. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.